How's it going, Guardians? Shifty here, and today I've got for you a new spin on a classic Titan build. Now, I would expect a lot of people to be familiar with the Titan build involving Insurmountable Skullfort and the Thundercrash subclass or Top Tree Striker. This combo essentially gives you infinite ballistic slam or seismic strike abilities. It's especially fun to use in low or mid-tier activities. Not only that, but there are ways to generate super energy fast using this build. However, in today's video I'm going to be going over how to improve that build using some new elemental well mods. Some of the mods I'm going to be using today do come from the seasonal artifact, and other mods come from the places that you can get the elemental well mods. Alright, just to break down how this video is going to go. First, I'm going to talk about the components of the build, then I'm going to go over how to use it, and after that, I'm going to show off some gameplay of the build in action. Before I get into all that, if you end up enjoying the video, make sure to hit that like button, and if you're new to my channel, don't forget to subscribe as well. Alright, to start things off, I want to go over the two striker subclass branches that I think work the best for this build. The first one I want to talk about, and my personal favorite, is the Thundercrash striker subclass. Here we have the melee ability Ballistic Slam. This makes it so if you have a charged melee and you end up sprinting, you will be able to jump into the air and slam to the ground and do damage to enemies that surround you. This does have a pretty decent area of effect. Not only is this a fairly strong melee ability, but you also have the impact conversion perk on this subclass. This makes it so hitting targets with Ballistic Slam grants super energy and activates inertia override. The key component here is that hitting targets with Ballistic Slam grants super energy. Now, the pros to using this subclass is, of course, you get a fairly large area of effect on your Ballistic Slam. In addition to that, hitting targets with Ballistic Slam will grant you super energy. On the flip side to that, there are some drawbacks for using this particular subclass. If for whatever reason you don't get a kill with your Ballistic Slam, you won't proc the Insurmountable Skullfort perk, and therefore you're going to lose your melee charge. In addition to that, the Well of Ion's Elemental Well mod does not work with this particular melee ability. Here is what Well of Ions does. It makes it so picking up an Arc Elemental Well causes your next melee to deal increased damage. As you can see in this clip, Ballistic Slam does 16,416 damage without any sort of buff. Then in this clip you can see after I pick up an Elemental Well, I get a melee damage bonus buff in the left hand corner. Then when I go ahead and use another Ballistic Slam, you can still see it does 16,416 damage. Like I said earlier, you can always go with Top Tree Striker as an alternative. Here you have the melee ability Seismic Strike, so after sprinting for a short time you can use your melee ability to slam shoulder first into your target and release an arc explosion on impact. One of the benefits to this subclass is if you miss your melee ability and don't hit any target, you will keep your melee charge. However, if you do hit a target but don't kill them, you won't proc Insurmountable Skullfort. Another pro for this branch is you don't have to jump in the air to do the melee ability. It's much easier to do this ability consecutively than it is to do Ballistic Slam. However, there are a couple of cons here. You won't be getting that extra super energy from hitting enemies with Seismic Strike. In addition to that, the area of effect for Seismic Strike is pretty decent, but it's not quite as good as Ballistic Slam. There is one pro to this that I forgot to mention. It does actually work with the Well of Ion's Elemental Well mod. So if you do pick up an Arc Elemental Well, you will get a 30% damage boost to your next melee attack. You can see here that the base Seismic Strike does 13,891 damage. Then when you pick up an Elemental Well and have the melee damage bonus, it goes up to 18,058. Alright, now that I've gone over the subclass choice in a little bit of detail, I want to talk about armor mods. These are what we're going to be using to make this build even better. I'm going to be starting with my helmet and working my way down. So here for my helmet, you can obviously see I'm using the exotic An Insurmountable Skullfort. For those of you who don't know what this does, the exotic perk is called Transfusion Matrix. This makes it so kills with arc melee abilities trigger health regeneration and restore melee energy. So anytime I get a kill with Ballistic Slam or Seismic Strike, I'm going to completely regenerate that ability's energy. On top of that, kills with either of those abilities will start health regeneration. Now let's go over the important armor mods here. First and foremost, I have two of the hands-on mod from the seasonal artifact. These will make it so I gain bonus super energy on melee kills. Then in my combat mod slot, I have Well of Potency. This also comes from the seasonal artifact. This makes it so picking up a matching elemental well grants you super energy. Next up, in the two middle slots on my arms, I'm just demonstrating that you can actually equip some anti-champion mods if you need them. But here in the combat mod slot, I do have the Well of Ions mod. As I already mentioned, this makes it so picking up an Arc Elemental Well causes your next melee to deal increased damage. However, I do want to remind you it does not work with Ballistic Slam, but it does work with Seismic Strike. If you are going the Ballistic Slam route, you could replace this with a different Elemental Well mod. Alright, now let's move on to the mods in my chest armor. Here in my middle two slots, I just have a Resistance mod and Concussive Dampener. However, in my combat mod slot, I have an extremely important mod for this build. This one is Melee Wellmaker, and it can go in armor of any element type. This makes it so when you defeat enemies with a powered melee, you will spawn an elemental well that matches your subclass type. Then for my legs, I don't really have anything too important here in the middle slots, but my elemental well mod here is Font of Wisdom. This makes it so picking up an elemental well that matches your subclass energy type grants you a temporary significant increase to intellect. This mod will effectively give me tier 10 intellect for 30 seconds every time I pick up an arc elemental well. Then in my Titan Mark, I do have two outreach mods. What these do is reduce my melee cooldown when I use my class ability. This is for one of those times where I may have whiffed my Ballistic Slam, or I hit a target with Seismic Strike but didn't quite kill them. Then I can just use my class ability to get some of my melee energy back. And my Elemental Well mod here is Seeking Wells, so elemental wells that I create will move across the ground towards nearby players, including myself. Alright, the final thing I want to talk about in regards to the build is weapon selection. There's not a lot of restrictions on what weapons you can choose here. If you're entering an activity with champions, you might want to consider using some anti-champion weapons. If you're heading into some general play, one great weapon is the Monte Carlo. If you do end up losing your melee charge, you can use Monte Carlo to get it back extremely fast. On top of that, anytime you get a melee kill with either Seismic Strike or Ballistic Slam, you're going to get 5 stacks of Markov Chain. That's going to be a straight up boost to Monte Carlo's damage. Alright, now that I've gone over the components of the build, I want to talk a bit about how to use it. It's relatively straightforward, but I still want to go over some of the basics. Alright, so like I said, it's pretty simple to use. If you're using the Ballistic Slam version, you basically just run around sprinting, jump in the air, and use your Ballistic Slam on groups of enemies. If you do see any elemental wells lying around, you do want to pick those up. As you can see here, I got my super really quickly. Right after I use the super, I want to show you how I can get it back in just around 20 seconds. So make sure to try to use your Ballistic Slam around large groups of enemies. Also try to pick up any elemental wells that you see. And as I just mentioned, I got my super back in just over 20 seconds. You can see just how fun this build could be in low to mid tier activities. Alright, now that I've gone over the components of the build and how to use it, I do want to show you about 3 minutes of Gambit gameplay where I got 3 supers in that time. In this gameplay, I am using the Thundercrash version of this build, and of course I am competing with other players for kills, so it does make it take a little bit longer to get my super back. However, I think that it's pretty impressive to get 3 supers in about 3 minutes of Gambit gameplay. I hope that you stick around to check it out. Otherwise, I hope that you have a good day, and I'll catch you on the next one.
Hostiles at the train. Invaders out. You'll get them next time. Invaders down. Next. Fight's over.